Feminism was beginning to happen. It really wasn't very prevalent. I just remember at that age, I was kind of a sacred rebel then, and I wanted to know more than sometimes Sunday school or church offered.
Welcome to the Sacred Rebel Voices. I'm Diane Zehr. This is a space where we explore stories of courage, transformation, and people who dare to live with fierce love in a fearful world. Today, I'm honored to welcome my guest, Diane Zehr, my wife and life partner for 41 years. When I think of Sacred Rebels, she's one of those that I think of most because of her story and journey, and I'm looking forward to her sharing some of her story with you, as she was a woman who wanted to be in ministry, but was told to know her place and how she's breaking many barriers. So welcome, Diane. It's good to have you here.
Nice to be here.
So just tell some of your story. What shaped your path and what brought you to into ministry?
Right. I've been thinking about that as we prepared for this. And I go all the way back to being 4 years old in my neighborhood in the inner city of Toledo, Ohio. And nobody in my family went to church. It was kind of a troubled household. And one of my neighbors took me by the hand one Sunday morning and said, "Come on, you're coming to Sunday school with us." And so she took me to church, and we went into a classroom with her daughter, my best friend, Kathy. And we sat down at the feet of a woman who was the teacher, Eleanor Basil, who became one of my life mentors, really. And she began to tell us the story of Moses and Moses saving his people as they crossed the Red Sea. And she was from the South, and so she had kind of a different accent than we did in Toledo. And she told the story this way. She said, "And Moses took those people across the Red Sea, and they didn't even get a sandal wet." I was very taken by that image. And it seemed to me that this God person who helped Moses and the people of Israel get across the Red Sea without even getting a sandal wet was a God that maybe I should pay attention to, because that God could do some pretty big and great things. I think actually that was the day I signed on to faith and to say, this is important, and I can learn some things here and that I can't learn anywhere else, especially at home. And so that began my journey in church, and church was one of my safe places to be and to go. And so I grew up in the church, went there, we'd get up in the morning, get dressed, and walk to church. It was only 2 blocks away. And I spent a lot of time there as a child and as a teenager in youth groups and that sort of thing. And I knew, as I thought about when I was in high school, what do you want to do? I knew it had something to do with God, but I didn't really call it ministry because I didn't know any women in ministry and never saw any woman in ministry. So I did know one woman who was in Christian education. And so I thought, okay, that's what I want to do. And I found a disciple college near Toledo at Cleveland, Hiram College in Cleveland, Ohio. And I wanted to go there. And there was a woman in the church, one of the kind of a matriarch of the church, who had really helped 3 young men all the way through college because she was looking for somebody from our church to be a Timothy, to go into ministry. And they all finished college, but none of them decided to go into ministry. So the minister of the church asked her, would she help me be able to go to Hiram, because my family couldn't afford that. And she said no. So I ended up at Toledo, University of Toledo, studying education. Really didn't want to be there, really didn't like it. And while I was there, I'm struggling with, what do I want to be when I grow up? Because I'm growing up, whether I want to or not. And teaching was the thing I could figure out at the time. And while I was there, our church needed another minister. And so we did a search process, and a young man came from Phillips Seminary who was single. And the same matriarch who said no to my going to Hiram College said, Diane, would you be on the search committee? Wonder why she would say that. So eventually, within a couple of years, she had, I really call it kind of arranged the marriage. She had a conversation with me and she said, you have gifts for ministry. You've done this all your life. Maybe this is the way. To be a minister's wife could be the way that you live out your calling. And she had another conversation with my former husband and said the same thing to him. This could work. And so we married. And it really didn't work, partly because I really never was a very good minister's wife. Right, Jerry?
That's right. And we're talking about a time, though, where, maybe some younger women today would think, oh, I would never do that, an arranged marriage. But what year was this? Because
69. You have to understand, I'm 76 years old. This was in 1969.
Yeah.
And things were very, very different then. And while women were beginning to think about doing more in the world, and feminism was beginning to happen, it really wasn't very prevalent. So yeah, life was different. It was a couple generations ago, at least.
Yeah. And I know that back then, after 13 years, you knew that this was not going to work. And really, I remember you telling me how, really for your own sake and for the sake of the children and everybody, you needed to get divorced, or you had been a very mean, unhappy person. And that must have taken some courage to make that decision to leave and to find your own way as a single parent.
Right, especially given my faith commitments. How could I make that promise and then break it? I know that when you and I got married, you tell the story about I walked down the aisle with my hands shaking. And that's why, because it was important to me to keep promises, and I had broken a major promise that I made. And I still struggle with it. I have to be honest about it.
But I do think there's, for some of those who are listening and maybe who are dealing in a marriage themselves, where they're feeling like this is just really not working. It's not unhealthy. I've tried counseling. I've tried all those things. And I really think that this would be the best thing for me. I mean, there was another part of you that felt like this was the right thing for you, right?
For all of us, not just for me. Yeah, for all of us. Yeah.
And then,
So go ahead.
No, I just think that, so I remember when I met you, you're a single parent with 2 children. And you tell the story about how here you were in Tipton, and tell that story about how you read that book, God is Never Absent.
Right. I was having doubts about my faith. I was having doubts about many things, marriage being one of them, but faith and how I got to be where I was and where I was going. And I picked up a book at one of our denomination's general assemblies, and it was called God is Never Absent by Clark Williamson, who was a professor at I didn't know it. He was a professor at Christian Theological Seminary, but I was intrigued by the title, and it became a very important book for me to read because it gave me permission to ask honestly the questions I had of God. And so I began that part of my faith journey. And as I was reading that book one day, I looked at the back cover and read some things about Clark. And it turned out I lived in Tipton, Indiana. He was teaching at Christian Theological Seminary in Indianapolis, Indiana. It was 35 miles from where I lived. So I made the trek. I went down there and I looked into CTS. And at the time, I still didn't get it that ministry was where I was heading. I was going to be I was going to be a pastoral counselor because I could envision a woman doing that. And so they had a very good counseling program at CTS. And so I enrolled. And again, that was a long time ago. That I was thinking back about it. I started that process in 1979. And so I was ordained in 84. So I've been ordained for 41 years. But back when I began seminary, in order to have the credential for counseling that I wanted, I had to have a Master of Divinity degree, which is what ordained pastors have, at least in our denomination. So I was getting the whole degree, and I did all of the work to be a pastoral counselor, except there was one thing I didn't have and I still had to do, and that was to spend 1 full year in a student ministry position, or a ministry position, and I had not done that. So I went to Southport Christian Church as the associate minister for a year. And as I was there, I fell in love with congregational ministry. Mm. And I really knew that really this was what I needed to be and to do. Yeah. That was where it was confirmed for me. I want to go back, though, to Clark Williamson because he became a lifelong friend and a very big mentor in my life. And I would sit in his class, in his theology classes. The first one that I took, Faith in Church and History, I started out in the front row because I wanted to get close and hear everything he had to say. It was kind of an auditorium setting. But I had to move to the last row because when he talked, he was opening so many windows of clarity and understanding. I would cry, and I didn't want anybody to see me cry. So I moved from the front row all the way to the last row where he could do his lectures and I could cry. And it was a very healing and wonderful time for me. And he's been a very significant person in my life.
What was some of those things that you felt like he gave you some answers or some handles to hold on to, that right. Things that you struggled? Because my hunch is there's a lot of people who are asking some of those same questions now in their own life that you were asking back then.
Right. Well, first and foremost, can I even ask questions? What does God think? If I'm saying, I don't know about this, I don't know if I believe all that. I don't know if I don't know what I can't tell you what the specifics were right now, but I just remember at that age, I was kind of a sacred rebel then, and I wanted to know more than sometimes Sunday school or church offered. Because it just didn't go far enough, didn't really look into the depth of who God is and how God works in the world and how God doesn't work in the world. Does God cause evil? Why is there suffering? Yeah, those are some of them. It was during the Vietnam War. Why do those things happen? Why do people commit evil? Does God make evil happen? All of those kinds of things.
Wow. And we could go on that whole conversation because I think a lot of people have those same questions, and you and I've talked about that. We believe that God doesn't cause evil, and right. And people have freedom of choice, and people make bad decisions or good, but I also think about that took a lot of courage to, as a single parent, to make that step. And there's a lot of people who are maybe in that same place in their life when they're trying to make some decisions and they're afraid too. Where did you find that strength to do that?
God. I mean, that's the only way I can answer it. I don't know. I mean, I would pray. I don't know exactly what's right here or what to do, God, but I'm going to do the best I can, and I'm going to trust that you're in it with me.
Okay. So it was kind of, I'm going to take this step forward. I'm going to believe that you're with me and you're going to help guide me.
Yeah,
And you felt that affirmation more as each step you took.
I did.
Yeah, yeah,
I did.
yeah. And I think I think in my own life too. I think that's where sometimes I pray and I wasn't sure what's the right choice to make, and so you got to make some step. You got to take a step, and or you
And
you
when you
know
take a step, you're in a different place. So things look different. And if you take enough little steps, you get there.
yeah, because fear can paralyze you,
Mhm.
and stop you from making any changes, and that's I think that's part of what impressed me so much in your own life that you didn't stay in Toledo, you didn't stay there, you didn't stay as this minister's wife. You felt a sense of to find your own voice. There was something stirring inside of you that said, "I want more. I need more," and that
Well,
compelled you
it
to go forward.
really, it was a little different. It was, I think God wants more of me.
Mm,
God wants me to do more than I am doing.
mm, that's interesting. And so you had that kind of inner something inside that just was drawing you, calling you almost to that.
Mhm. Yes.
So, what was it like, though, being a woman in ministry? I remember you telling the story when you were at Garden City Christian Church as a senior pastor, the first woman, woman pastor they had, and some of the pushback you got from
Right.
some people.
Right. Yeah, I remember Garden City was a very small and on its way to closing, kind of dying church with lots, as many churches are today, lots of older people. And they didn't really know. They were courageous enough to call me, and not many churches were doing that, but they did. And when I got there, there were a few women in the congregation who decided that this was a stated mission, that they were going to get rid of me. And they did everything they knew how to do that. And it was a very uncomfortable and unpleasant situation. I lasted 3 years, but eventually I had to leave because it just wasn't happening. There was not the connection there needed to be in order for ministry to happen.
And I was amazed that it was women who had the most trouble with you rather than men. And why do
Mhm.
you think that
You
is?
know, what I went and at the advice of the elders, I went and had a conversation with each one of them. And there were various reasons, but one of the women was most clear about it. She said, well, one, you're too young, you're my daughter's age. Two, you're divorced and remarried, therefore you are an adulterer. Gosh, what was the third one? I don't remember what the third one. She had three. But at any rate, she was very determined that I should not be there.
And again, there's those expectations that other people want to put on us, kind of to know where we are. And, that takes courage to say, uh, you might not believe in me of who I am, but I believe in God believes in me, and I'm going to move forward.
I mean, again, it just was, I knew what I was doing was the right thing to be doing. I could not control their response to it, but I knew it was the response I had to make. I had to keep going. I had to keep being in ministry.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that you and I have talked about trusting yourself. That's been a hard thing for me too. And trusting yourself, not just seeking other people. Well, what do you think? What do I think I need to be doing? But really trying to listen. And that's hard, when you've had people telling you to listen to them, don't listen to yourself. But
Mhm.
I think that's part of the journey, isn't it? To find um, find your own voice, I guess. To find out what your passion is.
To trust yourself.
What would you suggest to somebody who's trying to learn how to trust themselves? How can you give any suggestion to them? How they can what's a way to do that?
I mean, it wasn't just myself. I was trusting that God and I were in this together, and I trusted that I was listening to God, and I made time and space and ways to do that. And so it was really, I trust that God is in this and leading it, and I'm doing the right thing.
Yeah.
If I thought otherwise, I would have done the other thing.
Well, that makes me want to come back to that book, God is Never Absent, because that was such a significant book for you. And I know it's a powerful book for many people who've read that book. What was it? What was it in that book, in Clark's writing, that helped you understand God is never absent?
It was really the issue of doubt that, a lot, even I, at that time in my life, thought that the reason all these things were happening, why did all this happen? Why the suffering? Why the wars? How does God make that happen? Or does God make that happen? And, or is there not a God? Was the other side of that question. Is there no God? And I asked that question. And that's kind of scary when you're a young person and you've been taught all your life, you've got to believe in God. You got to believe. And I want to believe in God. That wasn't the issue, except that this God that I believed in, I didn't like what I thought God might be responsible for. So how do I reconcile that? And so, how do I trust God, I guess, was the issue. Can I trust God? Is there a God? And if I can trust God, can I be honest about the deepest questions I have?
And I know that your understanding of God has changed. I think, the kind of the old way of what I grew up with, and you probably did too, and a lot of people grow up with that idea of God as almost like a being out there, ready to strike you down, to judge you,
Yeah.
somehow all powerful, all, knowing,
Mm-hmm.
kind of being. Is not how I understand it, and I don't think you understand anymore. I'd be interested
Yeah.
in, how do you understand God today? What
Yeah.
to help other people grasp, an understanding of God?
That God's job, God's business, God's purpose in creation and creating and being with all creation, but with humanity, is to love us. Love us. It's grace. To love us so deeply that no matter who we are, no matter what we do, um, we are not put away from God. We are not separated from God. That God, we learned that through Jesus, that or Christians do, that God's love is unconditional. And although God would love for us to do as much as we can, always as we can, to become the best person we can be, that no matter where we are in that journey, God is with us and God is loving us.
Hmm. And that's the powerful, I think, message that, God is spirit. God is not a being. God is the ground spring of us, the universe, of the world, in everything. And God is love is permeating that and present in that. And so that for us to be connected to that divine source is really within us, not so much outwardly. And when we have so much noise and everything distracting us, it's very hard to find our center and find that sense within us.
I remember when my daughter Jennifer was little, she was describing God one time, and she said, well, there's God who's a man in a white robe, the usual man with the white robe and the long hair. And then there's Mother Nature. And she said, and then Jesus is the little kid with one of those helicopter beanies on his head. That was quite the image of the Holy Trinity that we got. But I tend to think of God more as a consciousness, not a physical being, but a consciousness that can interact with humanity and with all creation, that I can have conversation with, who responds to me in ways that I can understand. That's how I experience God now.
You mentioned some of those questions that you were asking yourself that I think a lot of people ask with, why is there war? Why is there suffering? Does God cause that suffering? How do you understand that?
Well, I think you said it earlier. I think humanity has this thing called free will. Now, in my deepest doubts, I have had questions for God about, don't you have a better idea? Isn't there something better you can come up with besides free will? Is there a third way? But that's what we got to work with. We've got free will, and we really mess up sometimes, and evil happens. And then it gets passed on from generation to generation. Part of what I want to do as I live out the rest of my life is to bring healing to some of that generational pain that has been in my family. I think is in every family. We all have, unresolved things that have started generations before us and that we carry because we learn from generation to generation how we think things should be handled, and it isn't always the best way. So that's part of what I hope to do, is to heal some generational pain.
And today, right now, we feel such a polarization. And I think a lot of people say they're spiritual but not religious, and that doesn't bother me, because I think where I am religious and spiritual. I mean, I come out of a faith tradition, and there was a sense of community about that. But I think it's fine. People who say they're spiritual, what I hear that saying, I'm not tied to any certain doctrine or denomination or certain lines, but I'm seeking, I'm searching, and I think there's more out there, but I want to know that. What would you say to that person, and how would you encourage them to find their way?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's been a significant issue for me in my life. Do I stay? Because of the questions I had, not just for God, but also for the church. I could go into some things that happen in the church that we all know that the church is not perfect, and the church is full of human beings who are sometimes doing their best, and often doing their best, but sometimes really blow it. And I have some questions for the church as well.
But for that person who's searching, I mean, I think part of what we have found is a sense of community. Finding community is important, whether it's a church community or our daughter who is in a singing group, and they sing together and they pray for one another. They care for one another, where, you're not alone. And
right.
I think when you get isolated, it's very hard to.
I think one of the significant stumbling blocks of our society today is how isolated we have become. We think social media connects us, and in some ways it does. We get more information than we know what to do with through social media, and it's not all true. A lot of it's not true. And so you've got to have a community where you can honestly ask the questions you have and honestly search together and care for one another, and value one another. And, people will say, well, I watch church online, and that works. It worked during the pandemic. It was the best we could do. But I think you miss so much when you are not face to face with other people that are struggling and asking the questions and celebrating life and celebrating what God is doing in their lives and in the world. All of that is so rich that to not be a part of that, I think it means you miss something that faith has to offer.
Yeah, and I don't think that has to be a church or some type of religious institution. I think as we are spiritual, we're all seekers. We're all on the journey together. But what I hear, and I think as we've encountered with people, finding others who you can talk with, process, ask questions with. So, when you're reading and having conversation, um, that helps you grow. And also to give me an opportunity to contribute something. Like right now, I know you're at Roberts Park United Methodist Church, a downtown church in Indianapolis. You guys feed 150 homeless every Sunday. And there's a lot of people who come down there just to help serve because they want to feel like they're making a difference.
15 Methodist churches from Indianapolis and surrounding areas take turns coming down to help serve our unhoused guests. Many of them come to worship before the meal. Not everybody. You don't have to. It's not required. But many do. And then they stay for lunch. And it's been, the most important work, I think. Some of the most important work I've ever done in ministry has been at Roberts Park with those unhoused guests. And I've learned so much from them. And it's
Well, what have you
significant.
learned? You say I've learned from them. What can you talk about that a little bit?
That in the worst circumstances in which you find yourself, they find themselves, there is a sense of care for one another. There's a lot of mental illness too. You have to, and addiction, but there's also a striving towards life. Towards how do I handle life now, and trying to find a way to move ahead. What can my next step be? Sometimes that gets sabotaged by addiction and by mental illness, and that's the sad part, is because you can see that people want so much more, but they are blocked by certain other aspects of their life. So it's been humbling. It's been joyful at times. It's been a wonderful, wonderful ministry.
One of the things that when I've come there to be with you, is how you will go to every one of these people to shake their hand, to know their name, so they feel valued, not discarded, and that's a powerful thing to give to anyone, I think.
Yeah, I try every Sunday morning to go through the pews and talk to people, especially the unhoused, all of the people who come. But I try to spend time with those who may feel left out or like they don't belong. I want them to know they belong.
So as we're kind of wrapping up towards the end of this time together, I have kind of two questions that I've been thinking about. The one I made reference to, and I just, as there are people who are searching, who maybe say they're spiritual but not religious, and they don't really have any type of community, but they're seeking God. They're seeking something to find some sense of wholeness within themselves, to feel a sense of their own voice and try to live out their life. Is there anything that you would offer to them as a guide that they might help them?
I think when we were talking earlier about what's a small step I could take toward that? What's one thing I could try or I could do? It's an experiment, or just to see what would happen. What's a small step that you could take, whether it's not too small to go to a new church, to walk in, or to a synagogue, or to a mosque, but to take that step and see what God can do with you.
And then my final question kind of is, if you could tell yourself at your age now, but look back at 40 years old or 35, what do you wish you could have known that you know now that you didn't know then?
So much. uh, oh,
One thing, just one thing
one
though, that you
thing,
wish that
yeah,
that
that
you would
you
have known.
don't have to force things, that you can allow things to happen. That doesn't mean you don't take steps to aid it in happening, but that you don't have to push so hard. You can enjoy life. You can just enjoy the step that is before you to take in the present moment.
Sounds like giving yourself some grace.
Yeah.
And that's beautiful. Well, you are a true sacred rebel to me, to have the courage that you did, to take your steps. You did the best you could when you got married. You did the best
I
you
think
could
I did
when,
pretty well.
and then but going into seminary and then putting up with me for 41 years has been pretty good. So thank you for being here and being my guest on Sacred Rebel Voices.
You're welcome.
And I want to encourage, if you'd like to see the full interview of this, you can go to my podcast, Sacred Rebel Voices, or I also have Whispers of the Sacred Rebel. These are guided meditations and reflections, 2 to 3 minute meditation that I give every week, or some of my writings at jerryzehr.com. Please subscribe if you like future conversations and be a part of this. Thank you for listening today, and blessings to you, and enjoy the goodness of life that you have.